everybody, and welcome to BPD Update. I'm Steve Strachan, your Chief of Police in the City of Bremerton. And if you're a regular viewer of our show, you know two things. First of all, that this show is all about what your police department is doing so that you are aware as a resident what we are doing in the community. And secondly, you know, we talk a lot about mental health and drug dependency. And there's a reason for that because, and I've said this frequently in public when I give speeches and that sort of thing to public groups, the majority of our time, the majority of the risk that we have, and the majority of our uses of force are related to individuals with mental health issues and drug dependency, and frequently, almost always both. That is the majority of what we're doing now. And it may sound funny, but it's true. If all we had to do was deal with bad guys that are committing crimes, this wouldn't be that hard of a job. But it is a very, very difficult and complex job, and sometimes a dangerous job. And a lot of that, again, has to do with how do we effectively deal with individuals with mental illness and drug dependency. We're going to talk about that, and especially about some great new programs, and specifically a great new program that we started up several months ago here at the Bremerton Police Department, and it's important that you know about it. So we're going to talk about that today. First of all, let me introduce our guests. To my immediate left is Sergeant Kelly Meade, and based on the way you're dressed, you're a sergeant with the Bremerton Police Department, which I know. Next to you, Kelly, is Sergeant Tim Garrity, also with the Bremerton Police Department. At the end of the table is Linda Melseth, who is our behavioral health specialist. And first of all, welcome to all three of you.
Thank you.
And we'll talk a little bit more about what Linda does, and she'll explain what her role is, because again, it's different than what we've done before, but it's exactly what we should be doing. And it's, again, starting to really produce some great results. So mental health, drug dependency, we've talked a lot about it on BPD Update. A lot of people understand what the problem is. One of the things we've done, and I'll throw this out to either you, Kelly, or to Tim, is the CIO program. So what does CIO stand for? How long have we been doing it, and what does it do?
Well, the crisis intervention program, the crisis intervention officer would be the CIO, but the program has been around for several years. They've had a 40-hour class which has been taught by CJTC over the past 10 years. Now, just recently, based upon the Osling Act, the state has actually mandated some additional training that the officers are going to be going to. Sergeant Garrity can talk a little bit more about the specifics of the Osling Act. But here with the Bremerton Police Department, right now we have 8 crisis intervention officers that have been through that 40-hour class, and we have another couple more that are going to be going through the pipeline.
Okay. And Osling Act is what, Tim?
The Osling Act requires that by 2021, all the officers in the state have had 8 hours of crisis intervention training. If they're brand new officers, they'll get that as part of their academy training. If they're already in the field, then the departments will make sure that they get that training. The training is actually done by the CJTC.
Criminal Justice Training Commission.
Criminal Justice Training Commission, yeah. They're actually coming. We have it set up in the county here, March 3rd and March 17th. And March 31st, we're going to actually go up to Squamish, because in this county, it's a smaller county. So we try to pool our resources and use the stuff that we have. So when we come to funding and money, we can do stuff really cheaply. And
first of all, the Osling Act, we call it that because the Osling family were the movers legislatively in a lot of this, and of course a local family, and I'm familiar with the Oslings. I think most of us are great folks, but you mentioned CIO, crisis intervention officer. So talk very briefly, if you could, Tim, about when a crisis intervention officer is needed because a particular call requires it, then what happens?
Well, a crisis intervention officer will go out when there's someone that has a mental health crisis at the time. They have a little more, some extra training, and really the idea is to slow things down, try to de-escalate the situation, and to try to connect these people with the resources that they need to get them from the situation they're in to someone that can help them. That's really what we do. It's more about communication than anything else.
Right. And if a CIO is not on duty in Bremerton and they're needed in Bremerton, what do we do?
We can actually call one out. The county has CIO officers. All the agencies in the county have.
Right. So in other words,
we can work collaboratively back and forth. We can go to another jurisdiction just like you would call out any other specialty officer.
Right. We work with each other so that any time of the day or night, CIOs can come out from any department that from which they're available. If you could, and I'll call on you again, Kelly. What are the challenges? And we could talk for 3 hours about this, but just in a short time, what are the challenges for us when we are dealing with someone who is suffering from mental illness and drug dependency? I mean, what is being presented to us that's really challenging?
Well, one of the things that we're really dealing with right now is just the number of mental health related calls that we're going to. Once that an officer gets dispatched to a call that's dealing with someone who is some sort of a crisis, getting there safely and evaluating the call at the time as we're walking into it in a safe manner is of primary importance. Just because they're in a crisis doesn't mean that we need to join into that crisis, and we actually need to take control of it and de-escalate and really just slow everything down. Right.
And again, that's part of the, I guess I'd call it the evolution of this profession and of the way that we're dealing with folks. And I would just mention, this will be a little bit of a political statement, but the public narrative, the social discourse that's going on right now, particularly through social media, is the opposite of what we're talking about. And this is not so much a response to the bad stories and the viral videos. In a way it is, but we've been doing this for a long time in terms of de-escalating and dealing with people more effectively and in a safer way. And I think it's important for folks to know that. So let's go to you, Linda.
Yeah.
You are our behavioral health specialist. And I would tell you, having been in this job a long time and seeing some of the challenges presented to our officers, the challenge has always been that we're sort of in silos. We're law enforcement, there's the jail, there's social services, there's the mental health system, and we don't always talk to each other. What's your role? What's new about what you're doing, what your role is?
That's a great question. I think one of the primary roles I have is to help people in the community find resources, and part of that process means speaking to those silos you mentioned, talking to those agencies and those folks that can more assist people in meeting those unmet needs that folks are finding themselves in the community. You mentioned drugs and alcohol abuse, you mentioned homelessness, we can talk all day about that, but what can we do to help folks that aren't connected? How can we get them connected? And that's one of my primary roles, is to connect people to those missing resources.
And that's what we've seen for a long time, and I've seen that in my, I've worked elsewhere and I've worked in another state, is, we contact somebody, we have the best intentions, we want to get them services, but we really don't have the knowledge or the resources or the time, frankly, to say, well, here's what you need to do to get treatment for this, or here's what you need to do to get housing, or here's what and you're saying, okay, let's connect those dots, and it's a lot of work. It's heavy lifting, and that's part of what you're picking up. Is that correct?
Sure, yes,
okay.
And a lot of aftercare. Our officers refer people to me, and I have the opportunity then to follow up with those folks, find out what the primary needs are, maybe some needs that they didn't even know they had, through discussion, and then we start to work on how do we implement some resources for these folks so that they get their needs met and get back plugged into services if they lost services and such.
So there's resources out there. We talk a lot about the fact that there's no place to put people in. There are resources. There are still gaps out there, but there are things that can be done. But as you start to connect those dots, I'm thinking about, just in my head, certain people that we've dealt with at the Bremerton Police Department, and we're seeing them constantly. And as sergeants, Kelly and Tim are running their shifts. They're responsible for a number of officers, and they're responsible for finding ways to solve problems. And it's not just a matter of being efficient and getting calls cleared for us. It's about doing what's right for our residents. But can one of you share, or a couple if you want, an example, a good story of something that has been successful in the few months that we've been using the behavioral health specialist system?
I went out one night and we were checking Road Vista Park. There's normally some homeless camping, stuff like that we come across. And we came across a gentleman that was sleeping under the bridge. He was in his 60s, sleeping under the Warren Avenue Bridge. So At first he didn't want any services, and I know Linda could tell you how, she was able to meet with him, and then he went back and he was back under the bridge, a week later. We contacted him again, but now she was able to get him connected up to some services, and he now has a place to stay.
Wow.
Warm, he's out of the weather, he's,
Wow.
and he's working forward. So that's just good stuff that we
Wow.
can do.
And again, I don't think a lot of folks know that this is going on, and that's what it's all about when you get right down to it. And so, from our perspective, and again, from a sort of cold calculating version of what I'm looking at, is that's not somebody that we're going to be dealing with. It's not somebody who's going to be at risk in terms of their health, not somebody who might be causing problems in the community. It's also the right thing for that person,
Right.
and for his family. This is a human being.
Right.
Great example. How about anybody else got another example?
I just want to add that gentleman you mentioned is also now working. So
Wow.
he's gone from homelessness,
That's great.
joblessness to working,
That
which
is
is
great.
really exciting. Another example is our gentleman. We had a really high utilizer in the community that was causing fear for folks, and he was afraid as well, and he's been able to be off the streets into some treatment, getting some outpatient resources back into services with his Kitsap Mental Health Agency in housing and off the street, and doing very well. And we have an opportunity every week. Sergeant Meade and I go and visit with him, which is really we're finding rewarding as well and helpful to the whole process.
And I have to share, I know who you're talking about, and the reason I say I know that is because just about every officers know who this individual is, and we are able to see a face, and we're able to think of an actual person, and for privacy purposes, we can't show you that face or talk about who it is, but it's somebody who was scary. He's scary to citizens, scary to families. The way he was acting was causing a problem and extremely dangerous. He was somebody I was afraid was going to get run over or be killed by somebody, and was really going downward. And to get that person on track, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. We can't declare victory, but what I think is so heartening is Sergeant Meade he sends out an update to our officers, to everybody, and says, this person's on track. If you see him walking to the library, stop and say hi. Because right now he's doing well, and we need to build a bank of goodwill for when he's not doing so well.
Right.
And as much as these folks might cause problems for us in our neighborhoods, there are brothers and sisters and moms and dads and sons and daughters. And this isn't the stuff that you see in viral videos. It's not sensationalistic. It doesn't lend itself to polarized and sensationalistic social media phrases. But this is what matters, is this stuff. And having Linda, by the way, I'm not sure we ever mentioned, she's in our building. She lives here. Her office is in our building right over there. And she's talking with Tim and Kelly and all of our officers all the time. This is what your police department is doing. This is funded through a grant from what we call the Meade tax, which is a 0.1% sales tax that was imposed. We chose to impose it. Our county commissioners chose to do that in our county. It's good public policy. We haven't solved all the problems, but we're making some progress, and that's what matters. If one of you could just briefly talk about what's next, where do we go next from here, and what other challenges are still out there?
Next, what we're looking at is adjusting the system just a little bit more, because right now we kind of have a dual system. One side only deals with the mental health, and the other side only deals with coexisting disorders of the alcohol and the drug addiction.
Heroin or meth, usually.
Right. Now, in the next couple of years, the legislature is going to allow some of the DMHPs, the designated mental health professionals, to take care of both of those disorders.
Right.
But right now, we only have one or the other, but not both.
Right.
Along with that, the beds that we have that are available in order to house some of these people who are in a mental crisis, there just simply aren't enough of them.
Right. So we need more of those.
Yeah, we
Exactly.
do. Yeah, we do.
And I was just going to mention as we finish up that, first of all, we need to really keep an eye on what the state's doing in terms of their budget, because having enough beds to put people is a critical need, and we never seem to have that, and that is a state responsibility. So pay attention to that. And the last thing I want to mention, we're running out of time though, is just, like I said, this is important stuff. These are human beings, these are people's lives, and I don't have to say that to all of you and to our officers and to the folks that do your job, Linda, but thank you for what you do. I keep calling it heavy lifting. It's heavy lifting. It takes a long time. It takes consistent and persistent work, and what you're doing is important. So thank you all for what you do and for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll be right back after this. Well, as you go into the second half of the show, as if you're a regular viewer, as I said, you know that we usually start with some numbers. So let's take a look at some statistics and numbers so that you have an idea what's going on around your city and your police department. First of all, these are for December of 2016. The number of reports that we took in December of 2016, you can see, was down substantially from the same month in 2015 down to 724. That generally is an indicator of activity. Doesn't necessarily mean crime, but it just means activity, which generally is a good thing if that's going down. The number of arrests that we made was also down pretty substantially to 144. Our domestic assault calls, thankfully, were down as well to 19. Our DUI arrests were up a little bit to 12 in December of 2016. And our traffic crashes way down from 70 in December of 2015 to just 31 in December of 2016. So a good month, some good numbers, and we'll keep track and keep an eye on where those go. So we look at our frequent flyer focus areas. These are the property crimes that sometimes can seem minor, but they're very significant to the person who may be a victim of these property crimes, and they're often committed by a small group of the same people. So we try to focus on those areas and on those individuals and getting those folks off the street. You can see that trespass calls, criminal trespass, was down to 18 from 30 in December of 2015. Our number of theft calls was down just a little bit to 53. Our vehicle thefts, stolen cars, were at 7 in the month of December 2016. I want to mention that of those 7 stolen cars, every single one except one was an older Honda. So again, and we've said this before on the show, if you have an older Honda, meaning the 90s or before, quite frankly, they're easy to steal. They use shaved keys. They're not difficult to get into. So if you have an older Honda, and a lot of folks do, I encourage you to get a club. That will be a really good way to prevent a car theft. The one that we had, by the way, that was stolen was a newer car, was a car where the keys were left in the ignition and the door unlocked because somebody was supposed to pick the car up. So I'm not sure what we're supposed to do about that one. Residential burglaries were down again to 6, and then non-residential burglaries were down to 6 as well from the year before. Vehicle prowls up a little bit to 18. Also want to mention, we talk about residential burglaries. There were 6, but that's reports of residential burglaries. Some of those turn out to be things like a transient going into a vacant home. Sometimes it's people, neighbors will call and say, it looks like somebody's burglarizing that house. So they're not actual burglaries, but reports of residential burglaries. Let's move on to the next one and talk a little bit about BCAPs. These are our volunteers. These are the folks that you see on Citizen Patrol in our city, and we started that program about a year and a half, 2 years ago now. And at the end of 2016, Joe Sexton, our community relations officer, shared with me that they totaled up their hours, and our volunteers did patrol of our city for 1,711 hours in the year during 2016. That's almost a full-time person. A full-time person is about 2,000 hours roughly. So almost a full-time person doing volunteer patrol in our city. And of course, these are volunteers that are not paid. What a tremendous asset and resource for our city. And they're doing vacation checks, they're doing vacant house checks, they're doing extra foot patrol and bike patrol. We really appreciate our volunteers. We also have our landowner notification and chronic nuisance ordinance coordination that is continuing at a really good pace, working with landlords to get bad tenants out that are causing problems in the neighborhood. Our neighborhood watch program is going full blast as well. And we're also doing trespass notification when people are getting trespassed from certain properties so that they can be charged if they come back. We are keeping sort of an Excel spreadsheet or a database of every person who's been trespassed based upon location and person so that it can be easily accessed and they can be charged and we can find out if they shouldn't be there in the first place. So we're really starting to streamline that system and frankly doing a much better job of it than we were even a couple years ago. Let's look at an important factor for you as both residents in terms of public safety and as taxpayers, and that is jail costs. The City of Bremerton pays for misdemeanor jail costs. That is the policy of our county, and it's the policy of most counties. And I want you to take a look at these are our numbers for the last 3 years. So you'll see here for 2014, 15, and 16, for Kitsap County, these are jail bed days. So this is a day in jail that we had to pay for people who were sentenced or are in a jail on charges from Bremerton, and these are misdemeanor charges, not felony. So you can see Kitsap County, it was at 13,000 plus in 2014. It went up to 17,500 plus in 2015. I want you to note that in 2016 that was down to 14,656. Forks, we sometimes house prisoners in the Forks jail over in the city of Forks, the twilight town over on the peninsula. We pay them to house our prisoners in their jail. You can see that that was down as well to about half of what we had last year with 609 bed days. We call them bed days. And then Chelan County, we're using Chelan County as well over in Wenatchee. We didn't use that at all in 2016. What we used more of was electronic home monitoring. We have staff members, Dave Boynton and others that work for our city that monitor folks and coordinate that program. And those are up, as well as our electronic home monitoring. We use it through a vendor or an outside source. And then community service is another factor. So the reason I'm telling you all this is that our jail bed days were actually down by about 3,000 in 2016. What does that mean? It means that people are still being held accountable. Judge Doctor and our municipal court are holding people accountable, but we're starting to see the curve bending downward in terms of costs to our taxpayers. So this is a very good thing. You can see that our cost, and this is just for the city of Bremerton, in 2014 was $1.27 million. That went up to $1.45 million. In other words, almost $1.5 million of Bremerton taxpayer dollars just for misdemeanor jail bed days in 2015. That number was down to $1.2 million, a $250,000 savings in 2016. Our cost per day also went down because of home monitoring and using outside vendors from $56 a day, almost $57, to just a little under $53 per day for each inmate. So what does it all mean? It means that we're saving money, we're being very attentive as stewards of taxpayer dollars, and still holding people accountable. Here's the point. We talked in the first half of the show about mental health and drug dependency and sort of the high utilizers. You heard Linda talk about high utilizers. That means people we're running into all the time that are in and out of our jail all the time, often because of mental health issues and drug dependency issues. In this analysis, $1.2 million, half of that money, $600,000, was spent on about 70 people. So 70 people are costing our city about $600,000 in just in incarceration costs. It's almost $10,000 per person. So 1,331 people were arrested or jailed by our city last year, by Bremerton, and 70 people make up half of that $1.2 million cost. What that means is that if we can start to do better in working with programs like the Crisis Intervention Officer Program, our behavioral science or behavioral health specialist, and the triage center that's coming up, getting people placed in mental health treatment where they should be, that it's the right thing to do, and it's also good. It's good. It makes good financial sense. And when you put those two things together, that's great public policy. So why are those jail costs going down? Because we're focusing on criminal transients and frequent flyers, those 50%. In other words, holding them accountable and getting them in jail if that's where they belong, getting them somewhere else if that's not where they belong. There's more community involvement. We have our volunteers out there and our BCAPers. Our officers are doing a good job. I'm a little biased because I'm the chief, but our officers are doing a really good job of doing great proactive patrol and working on problem solving. And our neighborhoods are connected. Our mental health professionals and CIOs are doing a great job. Our court programs are really, I think, doing very well at holding people accountable and monitoring people to make sure that they're doing what they should be doing. We're coordinating much better with social service providers, particularly the Salvation Army, to try to make sure that we're on the same page. Our medical costs went down because of the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. We know that with the new administration that may be going away. Keep an eye on what that's going to look like as it gets replaced by something else. And will that shift the cost then to us, back to us as local taxpayers? Because the ACA, love it or hate it, was shifting costs away, and that was picking up some of those costs. And then finally, one of the reasons that crime and jail costs are going down is community development. We have more people coming in, more construction, more commercial, more retail stores. All those things are great for public safety. There is nothing better for a safe community than to have lots of people walking and driving around and being involved in their community. So all those things are great news. I want to mention as well with those CIOs that we talked about, crisis intervention officers, in December, we had about 2 calls a day countywide, 41 for the sheriff's office, 16 for Bremerton. And again, we contribute our CIOs to those departments and they to us so that we share those folks all together at the same time. As I finish up, I just want to mention that it's been a busy year. You know, with some of the political changes going on in DC, we've been involved in something called the Police Data Initiative and the 21st Century Policing Report. That came from the federal government, the Department of Justice. We are going to continue with those initiatives, not because they are attributed to a particular president or administration, but because they're good, it's a good idea. Accountability and transparency is a good idea, and we're going to continue with our open data project, reporting out to you and on our website what all of our calls are. We break those out by race and gender so that you can see all the data. We'll continue to do the professional standards report to show you all of our complaints, all of our internal affairs investigations, everything, because you as a community deserve to know that. So we'll keep doing that. We'll keep going and moving forward and continue to become a better department. As you can tell, I'm really proud of this police department, the things that these folks are doing. We love to tell you about what we're doing and keeping you up to date on this show, and that's why we appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time on BPD Update.